You know that moment when the floor drops out from under your life and the truth doesn't whisper but roars. 3 days after my husband's funeral, still in the same black dress that smelled faintly of lilies and church candles. I stood in my living room while a lawyer I'd never met told me I no longer had a home. The paper in his hand felt heavier than a headstone. Behind him, my stepdaughter watched like a cat at a birdcage, and I understood that grief wasn't the end of my suffering. It was the beginning of the truth. I am Helena Morrison, 65, a former nurse who believed in competence, steady love, and the small rituals that make a life coffee at 7:30, garden gloves by the back door, a weekly grocery list folded neatly inside a purse I'd owned for years. I met Robert when I was a widow who had learned to hold her loneliness with both hands and keep walking. He was kind, careful, older, and steady. A man who bought roses only on ordinary Tuesdays because he said joy should never ask permission. We married, and for 22 years we built a life measured in quiet mornings, repaired picture frames, and a porch that held the warmth of 100 sunsets. I cared for him through aches, appointments, and the gentle indignities age insists on. Then one morning, his heart failed, and the world became a single, unlit corridor. On the third day after I buried him, the doorbell rang at 2:15 p.m. A man in a suit stepped inside as if the house already belonged to someone else. He explained that the deed had been purchased before our marriage and remained solely in Robert's name. The phrases complex and contested tumbled out like sharp stones. Camilla, 40, polished, with a smile that chilled, leaned on the doorframe as if it were a stage. 30 days, she said, eyes cool. That's generous. I wanted to tell her generosity had a smell, like cinnamon in winter, and whatever this was, it reeked of varnish and cold metal. But my voice did not trust me. I called my sister in Phoenix that night. The worry in Marie's voice cut through the line, but compassion does not pay rent, and her husband's medical bills had swallowed what little margin they had. I sat at the kitchen table at 10:40 p.m. with a notepad and the brittle courage of someone who has run out of denial. My nursing license had expired. My Social Security would not stretch. My savings, $3,000, looked like a joke told at a cruel party. For the first time since childhood, I could see the shape of homelessness, and it knew my name. 2 weeks later, in a coffee shop that smelled of espresso and second chances, I circled job listings with a red pen. Senior companion needed. Must enjoy cats impossible. Cats make my eyes swell. Part-time babysitter improbable. I could keep a fever down, but toddlers prefer gymnasts. Then, at the bottom of a column, a whisper of hope, experienced caregiver wanted, female, age 60 plus, private duty for wheelchair-bound professional, excellent salary, room and board included, serious inquiries only. My pulse found a rhythm. I dialed. An answering service passed me to a woman named Sarah who spoke like a metronome. Did I have medical experience? Yes, 30 years as a registered nurse. My age 65. Perfect, she said. Interview tomorrow at 2:00 p.m. The address, Malibu. I repeated it twice to be sure. The next afternoon, I drove my loyal, squeaking Honda through a gate that parted like a quiet secret and followed a palm-lined driveway long enough to lose your nerve. The house was glass and steel, and the suggestion that nothing fragile could survive here. Sarah, immaculately put together, led me across marble that felt like walking on cold light. Mr. Cross values privacy, she said. He has dismissed several caregivers. He prefers someone mature. The unspoken word unimpressible hung between us like a mirror. Alexander Cross was not what I expected. Yes, the wheelchair framed the man, but it did not define him. Mid-40s, brown eyes with a focus that could sand a lie down to its bones. Dark hair just beginning to gray at the temples. His office sang wealth without apology, floor-to-ceiling books, a desk wide enough to land a small plane, and windows insisting the Pacific would never run out. He asked me to sit. He asked me why I wanted the job. I told him the truth, which felt like stripping old paint to bare wood my husband had died. The house was being contested, and I needed work. He listened, not with sympathy's sloppy softness, but with a steadiness I hadn't encountered since the last moment Robert squeezed my hand. He was blunt about his own life. A car accident 3 years earlier had taken his mobility from the waist down. He built a fortune in cybersecurity in his 20s and now ran an empire from this office, screens turning data into currency. He needed basic medical oversight and the presence of someone who would not treat him as either a charity case or a piggy bank. I told him I had spent 3 decades seeing people as people and pain as a storm you walk through, not a label you wear. He studied me for a long breath, then named the salary $5,000 a month, room and board, a private suite. I held my face still while relief sprinted across my chest. When I left, my phone rang with an unknown number and a familiar chill. Camilla, honeyed voice, hiding thorns, wanted to know where I was living and whether I needed help. I said I was fine. Her concern sounded like a trap sprung quietly. I hung up, then stared at the ocean from the top of that extravagant driveway and understood a new kind of fear, not of poverty, but of someone else's need dragging me back under. That evening, Sarah walked me through my rooms, a bedroom, a sitting area, a bathroom that could host a choir, all polished to anonymity. Breakfast at 8 a.m., lunch at 12 p.m., dinner at 7 p.m., she said, a life set to a clock. Alexander confirmed his routine later. Casual but precise, no medications, physical therapy on site 3 times a week, no patience for pity. When I asked why he preferred an older caregiver, his eyes cooled. Because young women keep mistaking me for a prognosis or a payday. He said, I need someone who sees me as a man. I nodded because I understood, and because the next test of my life waited just beyond the gate. I woke the next morning in a bed softer than anything I had ever owned. Sunlight spilling across white sheets that belonged more to a hotel than a home. For a moment, I forgot where I was. Then memory arrived. Robert's funeral, the lawyer, Camilla's cold smile, and with it came the sharp reminder that this sanctuary was not mine, but borrowed. At 8 sharp, I joined Alexander for breakfast. He sipped coffee, his chair angled toward the ocean, and greeted me with a warmth that felt genuine. It was the first meal in weeks where I wasn't swallowing panic along with food. The days settled into a rhythm. I organized his medication chart, though it was barely needed, prepared meals, and learned the nuances of his independence. He ran meetings across glowing screens, his voice calm and precise, directing employees scattered across continents. At night, I returned to my suite, trying to silence the worry that at any moment Camilla might discover where I lived. My phone buzzed often with unknown numbers. I ignored them, though sometimes I wondered if the silence on the other end would breathe her name if I dared to answer. One evening, while we sat in his office reviewing routine schedules, I asked why the position had been opened so often. His expression darkened. 4 caregivers in 6 months. The first treated him like a wounded project, pushing therapy and platitudes he didn't want. The second drank more from his wine cellar than she poured for him. The third believed her charm could replace professional boundaries and angled herself toward his will. The fourth, Maria, had seemed different, competent, kind, until one morning she vanished, leaving only a note. Later, he discovered she had been probing into his finances. As he spoke, I felt a tremor of unease. People often underestimate what desperation makes possible, and his wealth painted a target larger than any wound. Before I could ask more, my phone rang again. Unknown number, against instinct. I answered. Helena. It's me. Camilla's voice dripped with concern, so false it nearly echoed. She wanted to meet, claimed she had something important about my husband's estate. Against better judgment, I agreed to coffee the next afternoon. At 10:00 the following day, I stood before my closet, wondering how one dresses for betrayal disguised as reconciliation. I chose business casual, armor of politeness, and drove to the small cafe where Robert and I once lingered on Sunday mornings. Camilla looked nervous, tapping her cup, her phone never far from her fingers. She began with a compliment that felt like an insult. You look good. I worried you'd be struggling. Then she dropped the bomb. A life insurance policy. $300,000 with me as the beneficiary. She admitted she had known but delayed telling me. My heart stopped. For weeks I had scraped coins, circled job ads, sat in motel rooms staring at ceilings, and all that time she sat on money meant to secure my survival. When I demanded answers, she shrugged. Probate would take months. Perhaps we could split it, since the house belonged to her. Her words sharpened when she said, $300,000 is a lot for someone your age. What are you going to do with it all? I wanted to shout that security is priceless when you've tasted the edge of homelessness, but I said nothing. Instead, I pulled out a phone number Alexander had given me. His lawyer's firm answered. They offered me an appointment at 3:00 p.m. the same day. When Camilla asked what I was doing, I told her the truth. Getting a lawyer. Her face drained of color. This is family business, she hissed. No, I replied. This is legal business. I left her sitting in that cafe, her designer bag suddenly looking cheap against the weight of her greed. Back in Malibu, I told Alexander everything. His expression turned grave. She's been stealing from you. I had my team run a preliminary background check after you mentioned her. She's broke worse than broke. Desperate. The word echoed through me like a cold wind. Desperate people do not stop at lines of decency. They redraw them. A few hours later, Camilla arrived uninvited at the mansion. Sarah intercepted her, but curiosity pulled me to the foyer. She walked in, eyes sweeping the opulence, widening as they landed on Alexander. Recognition dawned cross, as in cross technologies. I watched her posture change, her smile sharpen. She tried charm, tried pretending concern, tried to pull me aside. When Alexander excused himself to the pool, she turned predatory. Helena, do you realize who he is? He's worth billions. This is perfect. You're living here, earning his trust. He probably gets lonely. Men like him often marry their caregivers. Secure your future and maybe help me with my debts. I froze. She wanted me to seduce Alexander for his fortune. The suggestion tasted like ash. Get out, I said. She tried again, painting it as a gift, an opportunity, family loyalty. But I had finally learned what her loyalty was worth. I ordered her out before I called security. For the first time in weeks, I felt the clarity of anger sharpen into resolve. She had stolen my home, hidden my inheritance, and now wanted to trade my dignity for her escape from ruin. When Alexander returned, I told him the truth. His reaction was calm, but his eyes were storm dark. That's what I was afraid of, he admitted. Then he revealed the secret of Maria, the last caregiver she had been feeding information about his finances to someone planning to exploit him. The parallel chilled me. Could it be possible that Camilla's greed stretched even into this house before I arrived? That night, as I lay in the massive, unfamiliar bed, I realized my life had become a chessboard. Camilla was not finished. She would not stop until she claimed either money or revenge. And I, a 65-year-old widow who only wanted peace, had been pushed into a game where survival meant more than just endurance. The following morning, I woke restless, haunted by Camilla's smirk and Alexander's grim warning. Over breakfast at 8 p.m., he noticed the dark circles under my eyes. "Rough night?" he asked. I nodded. She mentioned something about my husband's estate, something she'd hidden. I keep wondering how much else I don't know. Alexander paused mid-sip. "Did you ever have an independent lawyer review the will?" My cheeks flushed. No. I trusted Camilla to handle the paperwork. His voice hardened. "Never trust family with legal matters unless they're your lawyer? Let mine look at everything." His offer was blunt, but I understood it was also a lifeline. That afternoon, I met Camilla again at the cafe. She looked polished, but there was an edge of desperation beneath the gloss. After a few shallow pleasantries, she leaned forward. There was a life insurance policy. $300,000. You're the beneficiary. My stomach dropped, even though I'd already heard the words once. She avoided my eyes. I found it in Dad's files, but I thought it best to wait before telling you. Rage licked at me. I was living in a motel, circling grocery clerk jobs, while you sat on this information. She flinched at the attention our voices drew. It's in probate. 6 months, maybe longer. But think about it. Helena, you're working now. Maybe you don't need all of it. Since Dad left me the house, why don't we split it? The audacity knocked the air from my lungs. I pulled out Alexander's lawyer's card and dialed in front of her. When I secured an appointment that very afternoon, Camilla's face paled. "You don't need a lawyer," she hissed. "This is family business." My voice was cold when I answered. "No, this is business. I left her there, her coffee cooling beside untouched sugar packets, and drove straight back to Malibu. Alexander listened to the story with growing fury. "She's been hiding your inheritance. My investigators already uncovered debts she's drowning in. She's desperate, and desperate people get reckless." His words echoed like prophecy. Because that very evening, Camilla showed up uninvited at the gate. Sarah appeared flustered. "She says she's Helena's daughter. Should I turn her away against better judgment?" I told them to let her in. When Camilla stepped into Alexander's office, her eyes devoured the surroundings, the sweeping windows, the shelves lined with accolades, the calm figure of Alexander himself. I watched calculation replace shock. Cross, as in cross technologies. Her smile turned saccharine. "Helena, you didn't tell me you were working for someone so prominent." I felt my spine stiffen. She wasted no time once Alexander politely excused himself. "Helena, this is perfect. He's wealthy. Isolated, probably lonely. You live here? He trusts you? Marry him, and both our problems disappear." The suggestion curdled in the air. I stood, my chair scraping the polished floor. "You want me to seduce my employer for his fortune? You've lost whatever shred of decency you had left." Her mask slipped, Fine. Stay poor. But don't come crying to me when you realize you threw away the opportunity of a lifetime. She left in a whirl of perfume and contempt, but her words lingered like smoke. Later, I told Alexander. To my surprise, he wasn't shocked. I suspected Maria, the caregiver before you. She wasn't just curious. She was reporting my routines and finances to someone on the outside. I never found out who, but the parallels worry me. My blood chilled. Could Camilla have already been circling him long before I arrived? The following days were uneasy. Unknown calls peppered my phone, and when I ignored them, voicemails piled up. Finally, one afternoon, curiosity overcame caution. Helena, it's me, Camilla said, voice trembling with manufactured sorrow. I made mistakes. I want to make it right. Meet me, please. She named the cafe again, against my better judgment. I went. She greeted me with an expensive bracelet wrapped in tissue. An apology? She said sweetly. I refused, but she pressed. Then her tone shifted, sharp as a blade. The insurance company is asking questions. They wonder if you influenced Dad's decisions. Elder abuse. They'll investigate unless you show financial stability now, unless you don't need that payout. The implication was clear. She wanted me to compromise Alexander, to prove her story wrong by making myself dependent on him. I left shaken, heart pounding, back at the mansion. I told Alexander everything. He listened silently, then said, "She's escalating, trying to scare you into surrendering what's rightfully yours. But you're not alone in this." He wheeled closer, his eyes steady on mine. Helena, I need to be honest. Having you here has changed something for me. I can't keep pretending this is just employment. My breath caught. I saw it in his eyes, something I hadn't dared to expect again. I feel the same, I whispered. But even as warmth bloomed in my chest, the danger outside the gates grew sharper. The phone rang again, but this time the voice was official. Mrs. Morrison, Detective Rodriguez, Santa Monica Police. We'd like to speak with you about complaints involving Camilla Stevens. My hands shook as I hung up. Alexander was already on his phone, summoning his lawyer. You're not going to face this alone, he said firmly, and I believed him. The next morning found me sitting in a police station, fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead. Alexander's lawyer beside me like a shield. Detective Rodriguez leaned across the table, his tone professional but concerned. Mrs. Morrison, your stepdaughter has a history. We've received complaints from 3 states' property disputes, contested wills, allegations of manipulation. Nothing proven, but the pattern is clear. I felt my stomach twist. 3 states. She hadn't just betrayed me, she'd been practicing for years. Mr. Chen, the attorney, kept his voice measured. Detective, my client has nothing to hide. But you understand she's been the victim here, not the aggressor. Rodriguez nodded. We're still gathering evidence, but the allegations of fraudulent insurance claims are serious. If you have any documents, marriage certificate, proof of caregiving, witnesses who can testify to your relationship with your late husband, it will help us close this quickly. I promised to provide everything. Still, when I walked out of the station, my knees nearly buckled. That evening, the television blared from the suite's sitting room. Camilla's mugshot filled the screen beneath the words, "Local woman arrested on fraud charges." My pulse hammered in my ears. Alexander muted the volume. "How are you holding up?" he asked gently. I stared at the screen, then at him, like I'm watching someone else's life. He reached for my hand. "You're not alone anymore." His words sank deeper than he could have known. Days blurred with interviews, lawyers, and reporters circling like gulls. The insurance company called with news that my husband's life insurance would finally be released. $300,000 security I hadn't dared to imagine since Robert's death. Yet as I hung up, the number seemed less important than the man sitting across from me. I had walked into his house as an employee. Somehow, somewhere between desperation and survival, I had found a partner. One evening, as the sun bled gold into the Pacific, Alexander wheeled closer, his expression stripped of pretense. "Helena, I don't want to play games with what people might say. Do you think you manipulated me?" "Of course not," I whispered. "Do you think I can't tell the difference between sincerity and exploitation?" "No." His hand brushed mine. "Then marry me. Not because you need security, not because I need care. Marry me because I love you, and because I think you love me too." Tears blurred the horizon. For a heartbeat, I saw Robert's gentle smile, heard his voice urging me to keep living, and I knew, yes. I said, yes. But joy is never left unchallenged. The very next week, Sarah burst into the office, pale. "Mr. Cross, Miss Stevens posted bail. She's at the gate demanding to see Helena." My chest tightened. Through the windows, her voice carried like a storm. "Helena, you can't abandon family. Help me." Security held her back until police returned her to custody, screaming that none of this was over. 6 months later, on a sunlit afternoon, I stood before a mirror fastening earrings, my reflection steadier than it had been in months. Sarah's voice floated up the stairs. "Mrs. Morrison, guests are arriving. Mrs. Morrison, soon to be Mrs. Cross, at 65. I was about to marry a man who saw me not as a burden, not as a paycheck, but as a woman worth loving." Our ceremony in Alexander's garden was intimate, framed by the ocean's endless blue. Marie flew in from Phoenix. A few of Alexander's closest friends stood witness. There were no reporters, no scheming relatives, just vows spoken with trembling conviction. As we cut the cake, Sarah approached, uneasy. "The jail's phone system has logged dozens of calls, all from Miss Stevens." My smile faltered, but I shook my head. "Delete them." By the time our honeymoon ended, the answering service had logged 99 calls, all from Camila. Her final voicemail was 20 minutes of sobs, pleas, and threats. I deleted it without hesitation. Alexander wrapped his arms around me. "Any regrets?" he asked. I looked out at the horizon, the ocean stretching limitless, and said, "Only one, that I didn't block her number 98 calls sooner." Camilla's trial loomed, but my heart no longer lived in fear. For the first time in months, I felt safe, seen, and loved. She had spent years scheming, manipulating, clawing for money that was never hers, and in trying to destroy me, she had led me to a life richer than anything she could have stolen. Life has a way of writing justice in unexpected ink. Sometimes the greatest revenge isn't fury or punishment, it's living well, refusing to let bitterness write the final chapter. I found love at 65, a second chance when I least expected it. And in the end, that was the life lesson Camilla could never steal. That dignity, integrity, and love are worth more than any fortune. Thank you so much for following Helena's journey. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more powerful stories. And I'd love to hear from you. What did you think about Helena's fight for dignity and her second chance at love? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Your voice matters.